welcome to a special episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm your host, Pat Poblete, and I'm here to take you behind the scenes of an absolutely stunning piece of journalism from the Denver Gazette, documenting the first time a Colorado jury convicted a man of killing another with fentanyl pills. But the story kind of more broadly sets the scene for the beginning of Colorado's entry into the third and worst phase of the opioid epidemic, And instead of sitting here flapping my gums, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the reporters who brought you this piece of journalism. That'll be Seth Klamann and McKinley. To the two of you, how are you both doing?
Good.
Well, I guess I'll kick it over to the two of you to start, and either of you can kind of dive into this. But let's talk a little bit about the reporting process by which you found this story. I'm curious, how did this kind of manifest in your life?
I'll jump in. So we were initially looking for a way to trace a fatal fentanyl overdose back kind of as far as we could, and which would give us a way to look at the crisis on a personal level, but also kind of go back and discuss the flow of the drugs and why fentanyl is as prominent now as it is. And so, from talking with sources of ours, we heard about Bruce Holder, who's not exactly unknown. He's been mentioned in plenty of media coverage over the last 3 or 4 years. But with the investigation having wrapped up, his trial having concluded, it gave us a chance to sort of go back and do a whole full picture of him. The prosecutors of U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado did a lot of the groundwork for us, right? By trying the guy and having investigations. There was a huge paper trail for us to follow, and that kind of led us where we went.
So, Carol, I want to take it over to you now, because Seth touched kind of lightly on how you guys went about finding sources for this process, but kind of dig a little bit more into that. Obviously, there are court documents available, but this story was bolstered by a lot of in-person interviews as well. How did you guys kind of connect with the folks who really come to illustrate the story?
Well, there were so many people who testified, and in fact testified against Bruce Holder, and that's part of what nailed him, that we just started doing everything we could to find those people. His family was involved. One of them's in prison. We wrote the people who found John Ellington, the death he's convicted of, did it over Facebook, over text, over Instagram. We met with them in coffee shops. We went to Grand Junction. Seth did many interviews with parents who've lost children, because Holder is only convicted of one death, but he's responsible, according to U.S. Attorney, for 8. So you're talking, 8 times 2 parents. You're talking at least 30 people who are family and friends, like a tidal wave of people who were affected by this. So we just started throwing out introduction messages to people. Hi, my name's Carol. Hi, my name's Seth. I'm with the Gazette. Hey, can you tell us what happened that night you found John Ellington? What happened when you busted that door window in the night when you saved Zach Green's life? Those are the kinds of things we did to start, and we struck gold with some, and we got no's on others.
So, Seth, I want to take it back to you now, because I think Carol did touch on a lot of your travel there, and I'm curious. You are both Denver-based. You work for the Denver Gazette, obviously. The story takes place primarily in Grand Junction. How much were you traveling back and forth? And I guess a side question I can spin off for you as well. Being Denver-based, was there any difficulty, I guess, connecting with folks in Grand Junction? You're not a journalist in that community. You don't cover that beat necessarily. Was there some awkwardness at first that you kind of had to bridge and get over when it came to working with those sources?
No, I don't think so. At least from my perspective, I think in talking to the parents that we did, some of them had been interviewed before, but most of them hadn't, and most of them were unaware that there was more attention to Bruce Holder than sort of the specifics of the case. So I don't remember having any sort of conversations like that, to be honest. I think a lot of times parents and family, and then some of the law enforcement people we talked to, some of the other people on the sides of the story, were grateful for some level of attention to it, right? And everyone brings in their own motivations and biases for why they want to talk to us, and of course we carry that. That's why we want to talk to you. But no, it's the sort of thing where it's so, these parents, their children died. John Ellington died at the end of 2017, right? So for some parents, it's been 5 years, 4 or 5 years, right? So I think they've been living in this world where a lot of them are really active in dealing with fentanyl or trying to raise awareness about fentanyl. And they've been doing it to varying degrees for several years. I think that the Ellingtons, when we first got in touch with them, their Facebook is covered in stuff about fentanyl awareness and just trying to make, bring awareness to the issue and make sure parents are knowledgeable about what's going on and not letting John just sort of fade into the background. So I think for them, it was like, okay, Colorado is paying attention to a different degree, right? And we've been living in this horrible way for years. And so I think they were, I don't know, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but they were sort of ready to talk, right? I don't think it was so much, oh, this is a journalist 2-3 hours east. But yeah, we went to Grand Junction twice. Once was sort of a follow-up trip for another story, but we did some work while we were there to interview people on the ground, to go to go to his home, the places where there's this conversation of them dealing. And Carol and I were based here, right? Carol, I think, has spent way more time on the Western slope than I have, but we don't really, I don't feel I can talk authoritatively about Grand Junction as a place, but our goal is to try and be able to talk about these people with some level of authority and the topic. And hopefully we got there.
So I want to close out by talking to you guys a little bit about what got left on the cutting room floor, because with stories as big and as expansive and as impactful as this, there's almost always something that somebody like me took out that some folks like you guys obviously wanted in there. So I'm going to give you guys both a chance, starting with Carol, to strike back at the editors. What is it that got taken out of the story that, in a decade from now, you'll think back and that'll be a detail you'll remember, or even, that little detail is something that the readers would really appreciate knowing about? Put it in publication now, starting with you, Carol. What got left on the cutting room floor that you want people to know about?
I think we got most of it in, but one thing we didn't get in, and I wish we would have done more of, was just people on the street who are, doing fentanyl. People who are out there with the, they're asking for money. They're hooked on the drug. Go down to the South Platte and look and see if there's anybody in there who's stealing stuff. What are they stealing? Can we catch somebody? Can we talk to people about where they're getting it? Before we left, there was a kid. It's kind of funny. There was a kid who was playing a trumpet on a corner right next to the county courthouse. His name is Trumpet, but he was as high as a kite. So I talked to him, and I called Seth. I said, I think we've got someone who knows where to get the fentanyl. He just had 3 friends who died under a bridge. We wanted to get him in. In fact, his name is Trumpet. He goes, yeah, that's all he'd tell me, and he was high. And I checked him out. When we checked him out, the 3 friends had died of meth, not fentanyl. And we couldn't get him into the story, but he was definitely a guy I would have liked to get in to show the grit of this thing and people who are, really coming down on it. And why do you do it, man? And how much do you take? And how much did you start with? That's one regret I have, is that we weren't able to get someone who is in the throes of it, who is willing to talk.
And Seth, over to you. What do you got for me?
Yeah, I have my own answer, but I'll echo that. That's 100% true. There were people who were involved in the case who were users then and recovered now. Some are still users that we couldn't get to talk to us, and people like Carol just mentioned who I wish we could. Sort of the people that it's a super long story, and Carol, as we were reporting it, Carol kind of had to keep reminding me that at some point the story's going to have to end. It can't be 10,000 words. we can't get everybody that we want to talk to into the story. But the people that Braden Hyatt was 18. He was a month after his 18th birthday when he overdosed. It was almost exactly 5 years ago. He just died July 18th, 2017. He's just mentioned in a sentence or two in the story. Carly Klein isn't mentioned at all. Unfortunately, she was a mother of 3 who overdosed in February 2018. I talked to her mom Kim for a while, and just it's so hard to get everyone who's impacted by this sort of thing into the story. And so we tried very hard to have it not just be this is kind of a true crimey story about Bruce Holder, because while he's the bones of it, right? The people that were impacted worst by him were these families, were the or the people who were using and died, and the families that have been left behind and spent the last 4 or 5 years trying to figure out what to do now. So we tried to balance as much as we could and get as much in there and still have it be a coherent story that people could read, in any sort of reasonable time. But people like Carly and Braden and some of the other people who overdosed who aren't mentioned in the story, well, we wanted to find a way to do it and couldn't. So, but they're sort of the ones that, if this were a book, or if we were writing 20,000 words, would be in there.
Well, thank you to both of you for taking the time to join me this morning to share a little bit about the behind the scenes process. It truly is an incredible piece of journalism. If you haven't yet read it, you can read it on Denver Gazette, you can read it on thegazette.com, or you can read it on Colorado Politics. Again, thank you to both Seth Klamann and to Carol McKinley. I'm Pat Poblete. We will see you again very soon.